Thank you again for being here. We're so grateful to be together on this incredible Sunday morning. My name is Janice Anderson, and I'm honored and humbled to serve as the Director of Christian Life at the Basilica and to work with the Creation Justice Committee, which is an incredible group of people. I would just like to introduce first Rachel, kind of with a formal introduction, and then a few words about the program, and then I'll hand it on to Rachel. Rachel Holmes may be familiar to you. I think she has been at every after 9:30 Mass program that we've had since you joined a couple of years ago. And Rachel is a part of our Creation Justice Committee and is a leader in that in our parish, and we're just honored that she's here. Now, Rachel is a national conservation leader focusing on protecting the health of our nation's forest resources. From an early age, growing up in New Jersey, Rachel had a curiosity about nature, and this curiosity brought her to Yale University, where she was the first to concurrently earn a Master's of Forestry, as well as a Master of Divinity, which is incredible and beautiful. And she's the former chair of the Sustainable Urban Forest Coalition, a broad-based national coalition dedicated to the advocacy for fair access to nature. She's a national leader in many ways. She currently manages National Forest Health Communications and reporting for the USDA Forest Service in the Washington office. She's also proud to be a wildland firefighter, which I did not realize, and a flamingo dancer, which I did realize. All right, woo! So Rachel, again, is on our Creation Justice Committee and lives in South Minneapolis with her husband, Joe, and her stepchildren and beloved dog, Banjo, who we do see occasionally on our Zoom calls. So we're just honored to have Rachel here. Just a few comments about the program. The Basilica previous lectures and workshops have highlighted individual actions that we can take in our own backyard. In an effort to complement those conversations, today we will explore a contemporary Catholic framework to conserve nature at multiple scales, focusing especially on opportunities to act for system-level change. Now, this is a nonpartisan exploration that's going to draw on both historic and contemporary Catholic saints, theologians, ethicists, and lay leaders to answer the questions of how we can individually and collectively use our own respective prophetic voice to conserve creation. Now, I will just reiterate the nonpartisan, because this is an issue that can easily slide into politics. So what we are committing to do is to stay nonpartisan in our exploration, to ground our time in our faith and teaching. And if we happen to fall into political or partisan comments in our Q&A, please know I will lovingly and hopefully gently refocus and reground our talk, okay? So no one's perfect, right? So that I just wanted to lay that as a ground rule. I will stop talking. Rachel, thank you for being here. God bless you, and off you go.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Let's start out, whoa, hey now. I was just gonna say let's start out with a sound check, but I feel like I'm at a stadium and should start rocking out with a guitar. But in all honesty, how is the volume? May, are we good? Awesome. Everybody else, are we good? Okay, great, thank you. Well, it is such an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be with you all today. That was quite the introduction, some of it a little over the top, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm standing at a podium that so many really important messages have been delivered from, and it's an honor to bring this messaging to you today. You know, when Janice, and I'm getting a little choked up here, so it's bound to happen. I want to highlight that both my parents are here. They came out from New Jersey. Yeah, they drove out here from New Jersey. So if I get choked up, it's my father's genes. He's probably going to start crying before I do. But the reality is that when Janice asked me if I would give this presentation, I got a little choked up because I said to her, quite honestly, Janice, I feel like a fraud. I'm here to deliver a message about hope, but I've lost my hope. And I'm just going to be real and be honest with you. So this conversation today is as much about me rediscovering hope in our Catholic tradition as it is about me sharing it with you. So this was my journey to learn, to rekindle that sense of future, of hope, of faith, and I hope that you leave with something similar. And before we go, she mentioned I'm a flamenco dancer. I want to just, where are my flamencas? Raise your hands, ladies. Oh my God, Hannah's here too, hey. This is fantastic. So I just want to say thank you all for being here, and let's get started. So I want to, let's start out with the clicker. Aha, jawohl, here we go, okay. All right, so this talk is part of the Speaker of Hope series. And for those of you that don't know, Pope Francis designated 2025 a Jubilee year, and the theme of the year is hope. And so the Basilica embarked on a year-long Speaker of Hope lecture series, and so this is the September installment. But for those of you that also don't know, September is also the season of creation as recognized in its 36th year by faith communities around the world. So what I want to try to do is I want to give you that message of hope, but then I also want to hone in on some messaging around the season of creation. And I want to keep myself honest and on time here because we have a really jam-packed day, folks. So the first thing that I want to talk about is hope. Where can we find hope? And does anybody know what this is? Where are my foresters at? Anybody that likes trees? Okay. Oh, it's an oak. Yes. This is an oak, and more importantly, this is a stump sprout. And I want to take us and pause for a minute, because in some ways, the environmental challenges we face, you might say, they're of biblical proportions. So where's a good place to start to find hope? The Bible. I've got this up here. Matt. That's my esteemed colleague, Matt Devine. Sorry, Matt, I don't mean to call you out, but I'm going to call you out, and I'm so proud that he's here. He's a great dude. And I promise I will stop doing that throughout this conversation. But what I want to point out is that this is a stump sprout. So what you'll notice is that the tree was cut down, and yet it's still trying to survive. And I'm reminded of the tree of Jesse in the book of Isaiah. So I'll feed you, baby birds, don't you worry. The tree of Jesse is effectively the lineage of Jesus. So it's the reflection of the Davidic line that set Jesus up to be the Messiah. So the tree of Jesse, the father of David, was killed. But regardless of that interruption in the line, we still have the lineage of Jesus that emerged. So, if you think about it, Jesus came from a broken line of nothing, of destruction, and yet here we are. We still have our Messiah. And similarly, and by the way, that's also the same passage for the peaceable kingdom. And similarly, I want to draw on a message that Pope Francis himself delivered in Laudato Si when he talked about Noah. And he said, and listen up, folks, although the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, nonetheless, through Noah, who remained innocent and just, God decided to open a path of salvation. In this way, he gave humanity the chance of a new beginning. And he then says, all it takes is one good person to restore hope. So that might be each and every one of you here today. He also said, the God who created the universe out of nothing can also intervene in this world and overcome every form of evil. Injustice is not invincible. That's from our church leadership. So, with that, thank you and have a lovely day. Just kidding. All right, so here's what I want to do for you and with you today. My goal for this presentation is to provide a conservation framework rooted in the Catholic tradition for caregivers of creation, especially people of faith, but not limited to people of faith, to apply to life situations and decisions so that we may grow closer in right relationship with nature and each other. And I've got "and each other" in parentheses because I want to just set the stage right here. When I use the word nature, it is inclusive of human beings. It is especially inclusive of human beings. And yet, I want to be sure that I do the encyclical tradition justice in calling out the fact that humanity is a critical part of our respect for creation. So, are we good? Okay. Back in the day when I was in studying environmental ethics, I typically had to say human and non-human nature. But we're all on the same page, okay? All right. So, how am I going to do that today? What I want to do is first define what I mean by framework. Then, I would like to share with you 4 principles of a Catholic conservation framework that I believe you can take into any situation that you may find yourself in, particularly in light of how we think about our relationship to creation. And then we're going to put the framework that I've shared with you into practice. And then we'll conclude with some questions. So, the first thing that I want to do, actually, before we go forward, little prefatory sort of housekeeping note, I want to make sure we're thinking about that I'm sensitive to everyone's different ways of learning. So, I have a handout for those of you that like to see and feel. I will have text on the slides for those of you that like to read along. I will also recite some of what's on the slides, just because I know some people like to listen. And then we will actually have an exercise for those of you that like to put things into practice. And by the way, one of the things that I used to teach youth a lot, and I would teach them how to be an audience. So I'm just going to say, guys, if you are miserable, please tell me. If you're enjoying this, also please tell me. All right. So let's talk about my methodology for how I derived this Catholic conservation framework. I don't know how many of you have ever played the game, if you had a dinner party, who would you invite? Well, rest assured, this may not be the quintessential dinner party. I would probably like a lot more debauchery at my dinner party than these folks. But for the sake of this conversation, these are the people that I would like to invite to a dinner party specifically for this room today. And does anybody know who those folks are? Just shout out. Pope Francis, great. Pope Leo, thanks, Mom. Yes, Dorothy Day, a very bad rendition of Dorothy Day. Who else? No? Thank you, Joe. That's my husband. Come on, you're cheating. But yeah, that's Marie Kondo, and we're going to get there, don't you worry. And then does anybody know the guy on the right? It's not a great rendition of him, but that is Saint Aldo Leopold. And no, my fellow Catholics, he is not a saint, but to us ecologists, he is very much a saint. All right, so what I did, how many of you have read Augustine's Confessions? Okay, great, twice. Wow, overachievers over here. Sandy, and you're not even Catholic. That's amazing. So I love that book, and in fact, one of the best translations is by Henry Chadwick. It's kind of written in contemporary language, and some of it's pretty funny. But basically, here's a guy that had a life of consumerism, what we might call debauchery. You know, he sowed his wild oats, if you will. But eventually, he discovered God, discovered the Christian tradition, and he begged for conversion. And so a good 80% of the book is about his drive to convert. And there's a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth and, Lord, convert me, but not yet, because I'm not done with my debauchery, is one of my favorite lines. But one of the things, the big precipitating moment for him in terms of this conversion was when he heard a voice that said to him, pick up and read. So Janice asked me about this talk several months ago, and that's exactly what I did. I need to pick up and read. And so I let myself just follow the little breadcrumbs of things that I've learned along the way and pull together as much as I could to build something of a framework that we can take with us in our daily lives. So each of these folks is going to contribute to our discussion today, but I want to be clear that the primary focus today will be Laudato Si. And how many of you have read the Laudato Si? Great, perfect. So for some of you, you might already be like, yeah, I know that. Well, I encourage you to take this as an opportunity to learn how I frame this, so you might be able to use this in your own conversations going forward. And for those of you that are brand new, this is some of the best of what the Catholic Church has to offer, and I'm very proud to have a pope, both former and present, that endorse this important work. So I read Laudato Si again with a lens towards behavior and its implications, and this is what I choose to share with you today. And may I ask for a volunteer, a husband, please? Oh, look at that, what a great guy. Now, I have to tell you, I did not anticipate so many people here today, and I feel a little bit bad. I only have 25 copies of my handout. Oh, Janice can make more, that's amazing. So maybe for now we can share. Sharing is part of our ethic, right? But basically, this is for those of you that like to read along. I'm gonna ask you, please don't skip ahead, stay with me. But if you do you, people, you do you. All right, so as those handouts are being shared, what I want to do is first define what I mean by a framework. Matt, will you read it, please? No, you are an amazing reader. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. And not to mention, I just put you on the spot. So thank you. He's like, I'm never coming to something you invite me to again. So the bottom line here, folks, is what I want to highlight is that an ethic is a sort of set of guidance for us when we encounter situations where it's not immediately obvious what to do. In some cases, it's black or white, right? You're standing in the supermarket, do I buy the toilet paper that's made from recycled material or not? But what do you do when it gets a little bit more complex? What I intend to do is build a set of principles that mirror a land ethic that we can use to apply to our lives. And I want to highlight also that he compares the animal instincts, and I love his expression of an ethic as a sort of community instinct. So comparing what Aldo Leopold puts out in his land ethic to Laudato Si, there's 4 dimensions or 4 spheres of what we need to concern ourselves with. The first is individuals to each other. Both men, Francis and Aldo, say we've got to be thoughtful of our ethic towards the land actually involves our relationship to each other. Aldo also stresses our individual to society, our relationship of the individual to society and society to the individual. They both talk about an ethic of how we treat or how we interact with the land, individuals to the land. And then, of course, Pope Francis shares with us that the sphere of our ethics must relate to how we relate to God. But there are many folks in our tradition that would say how we relate to each other is part and parcel of how we relate to God. So, the moment you've all been waiting for, I am going to, these are the 4 principles I am going to share with you today, and then we'll unpack each one. But some of these are going to be simpler than others, so we're going to start out with like a first course of the first 2, maybe a little soup. Then we're going to go to salad, right? A little more digestible. Then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes, and then we're going to have dessert together, and it's a shared dessert. It's a just dessert. Anybody? Anybody? Okay. So first and foremost, all life has intrinsic value, and we'll unpack what we mean by intrinsic versus utilitarian. The second, all of creation is interdependent. Next, creation is a universal good, one that cannot be used and exploited at the detriment of others. And then also caring for creation is essential. So let's start off with all life has intrinsic value. So if you scroll down to the bottom, you look down at the bottom of your page, we're going to start with number 1. So there's 2 concepts here. Nature is intrinsically valuable as a gift from God. God made it, ergo, it is valuable. God don't make junk. And nature's value must not be defined through purely economic terms. So let's start out with all life has intrinsic value. So I want to if you haven't read Laudato Si, check it out. He's got some really great like coffee mug statements. One of which I love, and I'm just gonna, in interest of time, I'm just gonna read the bolded pieces, but my hope is to be able to share this deck with you so you have the excerpts. But I love that he said, clearly, the Bible has no place for a tyrannical anthropocentrism, meaning, I am man, I am human, the world is according to me. Tyrannical anthropocentrism unconcerned for other creatures. And then he goes on in that same area, in that same passage, he goes on to quote the German bishops who say, we can speak of the priority of being over that of being useful. So, a tick, is it useful to us? I've had 4 tick-borne diseases. I might say no. However, it is a creature of God. Each creature possesses its own particular goodness and perfection. So let's move on, and let's talk about the economic valuation piece. And here's another place where I want to put Pope Francis and Aldo Leopold in communication. So they're both effectively saying that this historic notion of evaluating nature based on profit and gain and what we can sell it for, that doesn't fly, my words. So what Pope Francis is talking about when he says, he's talking about this might is right, this nature, I have the authority to exercise control and use nature for whatever I want and sell it for whatever I think it's worth today. He's saying that runs counter to what Jesus taught us. When nature is viewed solely as a source of profit and gain, this has serious consequences for society. And he mentions again that this is what the teachings of Jesus tells us. Aldo Leopold, on the other hand, wrote, and by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, but all these excerpts are from an essay that he wrote called The Land Ethic in a book called A Sand County Almanac. Has anybody heard of that book? Oh, that's so good to see. Thank you. That's awesome. So Sand County Almanac, little side note, Sand County Almanac was printed in 1949 posthumously. So actually, and close your ears, Mom, actually Aldo Leopold died while fighting a wildfire on his neighbor's farm in Wisconsin. So his son Luna actually compiled all of his most salient essays and put them in this volume, Sand County Almanac. And this land ethic is perhaps the most famous of all of them, but I would submit to you it's worth a read. But it's a great article, back now, side note over. What he's talking about is an A-B cleavage. He's talking about 2 groups of people. Group A, the people that evaluate nature based on its utility and its economic value to me. And he mentions the example of the timber wolf, which at one point was alive and free-ranged around in this area. But because it was a detriment to cattle ranching, cattle had a higher economic value, so the timber wolf was driven out of these lands. And I want to highlight my husband, who is actually working to try to bring back wolves. Right? No, he's not. Never mind, I lied. But it's a nice idea. Wouldn't it be great if we could get a pet wolf? All right. So, and then the B group. The people that recognize that land is a biota, meaning it's an entire system, and its function is more than economic purposes. So we also think about wildlife, we think about recreation, we think about the watersheds. We can also think about wilderness areas. These are things where you might never extract resources, but they have value beyond just their economic value. They have existence value in the ethical discourse. So he's saying that Group B feels the stirrings of an ecological conscience. And what he also says, and I want to quote him here, and listen, please, listen for the hints of Catholicism and what we think as Christians. In all of these cleavages, we see repeated the same basic paradoxes. Man the conqueror versus man the biotic citizen, science the sharpener of his sword versus science the searchlight on his universe, land the slave and servant versus land the collective organism. There's a lot of parallels to the way that we have been taught as Catholics especially to be thoughtful, in particular about people, as more than cogs in the wheel. Last year, Father Daniel did an excellent job of talking about conservation in the frame of Catholic social teaching, and he drew on rerum novarum. That's probably one of the most important works beyond the papal encyclical Laudato Si that we can draw on, because it establishes this notion that people, and extended to creation, are worth more than what they do for us. That said, Joe, I would like a cocktail when I get home. All right, but of course after 5, don't worry. So that's all nature has intrinsic value. So let's move into all creation is interdependent. So I want to point out, and this again is adapted from my reading of Laudato Si, interdependence was intended by God. The harm towards nature is a harm towards humanity. And there is a connective tissue that binds us together that's worth thinking about. So, first and foremost, all of creation is interdependent. I think this is important to point out, that the Pope is effectively saying what ecologists typically know to be true, that nature is connected, it's one system, the ecosystem. He's also saying, hey, we as Catholics believe that too. So he's saying God wills the interdependence of creatures. This is not just an out there scientific concept, this has theological roots for us. And he's also saying creatures exist only in dependence on each other to complete each other in the service of each other. And I love, this is one of my favorite quotes in the book, or in the encyclical, when he says, here I could reiterate that God has joined us so closely to the world around us that we can feel the desertification of the soil almost as a physical ailment, and the extinction of a species as a painful disfigurement. And I'm getting a little emotional over here. We can't afford to cut our arm off in the sense of desecrating nature and what God has created. Harm to nature is harm to people. I'll let that sink in. The other concept here of the interdependence of nature, both of them are saying that there's what I'm calling connective tissue that binds all of these elements of creation together. For the theologian, for Pope Francis, it's God's love. And for Aldo Leopold, it's energy. I would love to get those two guys in a room and be like, so what's the difference? Discuss. But the bottom line is that there is, in fact, a tissue that binds us all together. And Aldo Leopold talks a lot about the food chain. He talks a lot about the interconnectedness of energy and systems. And he talks about the food pyramid, right? So at the very bottom are microorganisms that then feed plants. And then there's lower order herbivores, right? And then they feed carnivores, and then omnivores. And then we are at the top, right? And he wrote at a time when it was okay to say that, because it didn't have all the implications that it does now, right? If we say man is at the top. But I would argue that over that pyramid is perhaps God. And we're all serving the broader creation. All right. And now, how's everybody doing? All right, so you finished your soup, you finished your salad. This, anybody know where this is? Yes! How did you guys know it's Lake Superior? Yeah, that's true. I'm from New Jersey, so we don't have giant lakes like this. But I guess I realize every Minnesotan, like, you guys like see a drop of water and you're like, yep, Lake Harriet. For me, I'm still trying to figure out what's where, but Joe has been a big help. But I put this up here as a little break, this little plug for nature. So there's a whole body of research that documents the benefits of nature for not just physical well-being, but also mental, emotional, and academic well-being. There's attention restoration theory that says that when you affix your gaze upon nature's elements, it relaxes the part of the brain that would otherwise be sort of distracted, which is common for people with ADHD. So it gives a soothing image to the side of your brain that might be otherwise like restless or active, and it gives you the mental space to focus on higher order tasks. So I'm feeding all of you, because we're gonna get into it, people. All right. And so where are we? So we started with these two pieces, and now we're gonna get into a conversation about creation as a universal good and caring for creation as essential. And I'm mindful of time. We do have an exercise that we want to get to, so bear with me. So first and foremost, creation is universal good belonging to all, and there's two dimensions of this. Private property ought, to use the ethics language, ought to have a social purpose, and private property cannot be acquired at the expense of others. Sorry guys, but again, I'm just going to highlight the highlighted text. You will have these slides. But in the sense that there is a social purpose, Pope Francis quotes St. John Paul II in saying, the church does indeed defend the legitimate right to private property, so it's okay, you can own your home. But the church also teaches no less clearly that there is always a social mortgage on all private property in order that goods may serve the general purpose that God gave them. So, when you buy your broccoli and your lettuce, what are you going to do with it? Or your toilet paper? I jest, right? There are some of those things that we need to acquire for our purposes. But what are we thinking about when we make those purchases? We'll get to that in a second. Also, the second piece of this is that our acquisition of private property cannot be at the expense of others, and that includes future generations. I really appreciate the way that Pope Francis comments on the New Zealand bishops when he mentioned, thou shalt not, they asked what the commandment, thou shalt not kill, means, when 20% of the world's population consumes resources at a rate that robs the poor nations and future generations of what they need to survive. Are we taking too much at the expense of others? All right, we went dark there for a minute, but it's an important question to be asking ourselves. So now, let's bring joy to our lives. All right, so as I said, Lord, I asked the Holy Spirit and Marie Kondo popped up, people. So don't blame me, blame God. But I read this book, I think probably during the pandemic when all of us were like, whatever to do with our time? And wow, I have so much stuff. And I was really actually touched when you think about what it is that she's asking us to do. Sure, this is all about tidying up, but really, she's calling into question our motivations around acquisition. And in fact, if you get to the back of the book, she has some pretty salient questions that she asks of us, and I want to share some with you here. She says here, the question of what you want to own is actually the question of how you want to live your life. She also says, overall, learning to let go of our possessions and honor and cherish the ones that bring us joy is a way to hone our decision-making skills. Also a way to help us get back to our core values. And she talks about this notion of being aware of the things in your household, of having joy, keeping the things around you that bring joy, having relationship with those things. It's okay to have things. I have things. I have a milk glass collection, but that milk glass brings me joy. That's weird. But what I want to do, and if anybody wants to come see it, it will bring you joy too. Come on over. But if we were to translate what she's telling us into two simple questions when you go to the store, and I'll admit, I wanted a new outfit for this conversation, but I was like, you know what? I don't need a new outfit. I have things in my closet that I love. This happens to be my favorite blazer. But let's take maybe two questions for ourselves when we're thinking what we're going to purchase next. The first is this a need or it is a want? And it's okay if it's a want. Let's not wear our hair shirt. If it is a want, where is my heart? Am I buying this because I know it's going to bring me joy? Or am I buying this because it's filling some void? It will not fill the void. Pope Francis makes that pretty clear. All right, I want to move into this notion of caring for creation is essential. First of all, how are we doing? Are we sold on the Marie Kondo bit a little bit? All right, if anybody wants to borrow the book, you're more than welcome, but it's a pretty good book. So, Janice, am I allowed to say cafeteria Catholicism? Okay. All right. Hopefully there's like a 5-second delay, but anyway. You've all heard of this term, cafeteria Catholicism. For those of us that are new to Catholicism, it's this notion that you can't, as a Catholic, pick and choose what you think applies and what doesn't, right? What Pope Francis is saying, creation care, stewardship of the world, of the environment, is not negotiable. If you call yourself Catholic, you are a tiller of the earth. So, the components here, being a steward of creation is indispensable to the Christian experience. We need to lead with curiosity and wonder. We need to be self-reflective, examine our habits, and repent when we need to. And this is a potential tie to restorative justice, which is a big campaign here and a big focus for the Basilica. And lastly, network for action through social love and shared purpose. So here we go. Caring for creation is essential. He puts it pretty, this is what I would put on the coffee mug, maybe even a t-shirt, bumper sticker perhaps, but you'd have to be tailgating me to read the entirety of it. Never a good scene when I'm from New Jersey. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. Who wants to read? Carol. Carol. Yeah, I'm talking to you, girl. Yeah. Will you read in a loud and booming voice that last bit there? Okay. Who has the most? Dad. Dad, would you mind reading It is not optional?
That sentence?
Yes, Father.
Living our vocation, to be protectors of God's handiwork, is essential to a life of virtue. It is not an optional or a secondary aspect of our Christian experience.
Non-negotiable, people. By the way, my father is the OG lector from church back home. My great-grandfather raised the bell tower. My father was a lector. My brother was an altar boy. I played the flute because they didn't allow female altar servers. But anyway, that's another story for another day. But the point here is, guys, we can't look the other way. So the second concept here, we can't conserve what we don't know and what we don't love. Pope Francis very clearly says, slow down. Guilty. I'm running 500 miles an hour, guys. I'm a forester, and I don't remember the last time I was in the woods. That's not true, I do. But the point being, I don't get into the woods nearly enough. It's not a luxury that all of us have, right, Matt? I know you're probably the other end. You're like, I'm in the woods all day. I just want to sit on the couch and watch TV. But the point being, we, both Francis and Aldo, say you can't conserve what you don't know and what you don't love. He's saying by learning to see and appreciate beauty, we learn to reject self-interested pragmatism. And Aldo very clearly says we can be ethical only in relation to something we can see, feel, understand, love, or otherwise have faith in. It's incumbent upon us as Catholics to take time, experience creation. That doesn't mean you need a PhD in ecology. That means just go, take a couple minutes, walk by the lake, slow down, listen, see what you hear what you hear, see what you see. The next concept here is repentance. And here I want to juxtapose Marie with Pope Francis. So he's telling us that it's important for us, when we're in this frenetic pace of life, it's important for us to pause and take a look at how we run our show. He doesn't say that, but you get my drift. He's saying that he quotes he reflects on St. Francis of Assisi, saying a healthy relationship with creation entails the recognition of our errors, sins, faults, and failures, and leads to heartfelt repentance and desire to change. We all have room to grow, folks. And he's also saying taking time to recover a serene harmony with creation, reflecting on our lifestyle and our ideals, and contemplating the Creator who lives among us and surround us, whose presence must not be contrived but found uncovered. It's our responsibility to ask the hard questions. Am I doing enough? Or am I doing too much? Marie Kondo is kind of sending us a similar message. When she says the things we own are real, they exist here and now as a result of choices made in the past by no one other than ourselves. It is only when we face the things we own one by one and experience the emotions they evoke that we can truly appreciate our relationship with them. And that's not just, do I have too many tchotchkes? Do I appreciate my tchotchkes? Think about all the decisions that we make, how we choose to heat our homes, how we get to work. Those are all reflective of decisions that we've made for ourselves along the way. And if there's room to improve, no need to flog yourself. We all are both the young son and the old son in the prodigal son parable. We've all been out selling all our money, selling all our inheritance. At some point, we're going to turn up empty. But we've also probably been on the other side of the coin, or the corn. It's a big thing in Minnesota. All right. In the home stretch, my people, in the home stretch, don't you worry. So the last piece here is that networks are built through social love and shared purpose. This is one of my favorites, and it's where I have this at the end because I want it to sit with you. All right, everybody, take a deep breath. Thank you, people, for honoring. Yes, everyone, take a deep breath. I need to hear it. Gracias. And I want this to sink in. Pope Francis is telling us social problems must be addressed by community networks and not simply by the sum of individual good deeds. Yes, individual good deeds are important, but if we keep focusing on our individual deeds, that's, I would argue, maybe even a different shade of that same individualism that Pope Francis is telling us is problematic in this ecological crisis. It's time for us to start thinking outward. How do we pull together as like-minded individuals who are from this shared tradition? How do we reflect that as a community? And I love that he talks about social love. The thing that binds us together, yes, it's shared principles, shared values, but it's love. He says social love moves us to devise larger strategies to halt environmental degradation. And then he says, when we feel that God is calling us to intervene with others in these social dynamics, we should realize that this too is part of our spirituality. How many of us, when you hear spirituality, I know historically I've thought about like, oh, that's how I pray, right? But this concept of spirituality as a shared experience, a shared purpose, one that is justified and endorsed by our Catholic faith, that says something. All right. So those are the four pieces. We're going to come back to this concept of a social network, but you may all be saying, I don't know what you're saying. Hopefully it's nothing bad, but if it is, that's okay. Just tell me after. You may all be saying, well, that's all well and good. Pope Francis had all this great wisdom, but there's a new gig in town, right? Pope Leo. What's he got to say about all this? Will he carry the torch? 1,000,000% yes. In fact, this is Pope Leo the 14th at the new Laudato Si. It's the Borgo Laudato Si. It's in Castel Gandolfo in Rome. This is the papal palace. This is his vacation spot that he opened to become an ecological center for training and spiritual development. Now, to be fair, it was his first inspired by Pope Francis, but he has put it into play. And I want to just mention something that he said here. So he says environmental justice, and this was at a speech on the World Day of Prayer for Creation on September 1st. So this was very recent, where he says, environmental justice, implicitly proclaimed by the prophets, can no longer be regarded as an abstract concept or a distant goal. It is an urgent need that involves much more than simply protecting the environment. Then he goes on to say, in a world where the most vulnerable of our brothers and sisters are the first to suffer the devastating effects of climate change, deforestation, and pollution, care for creation becomes an expression of our faith and humanity. He also says, and he quotes Francis, the same passage that I shared with you, now is the time to follow words with deeds. Living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It is not optional or secondary. So he references, and then one more thing I want to say here. By working with love and perseverance, there's love again, we can sow many seeds of justice and thus contribute to the growth of peace and the renewal of hope. Here's another piece, guys. Time. It may well take years for this plant to bear its first fruits, years that, for their part, involve an entire ecosystem made up of continuity, fidelity, cooperation, and love, especially if that love mirrors the Lord's own self-sacrificing love. He is not mincing words, people. So I say to each one of you, we have big brass behind us. These are the moral leaders of 1 billion plus people in the world telling us we need to up our game. Care for creation is part and parcel of being Catholic. And we have options. We have resources. We have potential. I want to wrap up, and we are going to get to an exercise. And admittedly, I did not plan for so many people, but I think it could still work. And thank you all for being here. It's so cool. I thought maybe like just my parents and my husband would be here. And that would be cool. We could have a conversation. But I'm just so thankful all of you are here today, too. Anybody know who this is? I know it says it right there. Dorothy Day. So I really appreciate her. And so, she is so important to our faith. In fact, 2015 was the first time that a pope addressed Congress, the U.S. Congress. It was Pope Francis. And in his address, he wanted to highlight 4 exemplary Americans for what they've contributed, what he thinks Americans or who Americans ought to be and are. The 4 people, anybody know? Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., Thomas Merton, and Dorothy Day. Which I think, was there applause right there? Did I hear applause? Yes. Nice job, Jean. Nice job. You know, it's interesting because Dorothy Day herself was on an FBI watch list for being an anarchist. And there's a really fantastic documentary. It's only 57 minutes long. It's on PBS. I highly recommend it. Martin Sheen. Who knew Martin Sheen was an expert in Dorothy Day? Crazy. But it's very thoughtfully well put together. And they highlight the fact that she was an anarchist, if you called her that, in the sense that she believed it's not right to relegate what we as individuals should do to the government. That's her notion of personalism. We have an obligation, and she very clearly in this video says, if someone comes to my door and they're hungry, I'm not just gonna say, hey, there's social services down the street. Or like, there's a soup kitchen, the government provides a soup kitchen on Tuesdays. If they come to your door and they are hungry, provide them food. And the important thing that she did was highlight that it's as important to provide food to the folks in front of you who are hungry as it is to work on the systems that are creating that hunger in the first place. You need to work at both sides of the scale, and that's what I want to encourage today. One other little known fact, which I find so fascinating, it was the love of her life was a trained biologist that she credits with bringing her to the Catholic faith. She says, I always thought life with him, his name's Foster Bertram, I always thought life with him brought me to God. His ardent love of creation brought me to the creator of all things. Sadly, she was a woman of faith, believed very strongly in marriage, and he did not. But shortly after the birth of her daughter is when she converted to Catholicism and then took up the yoke of fighting to end injustice. And so her notion of personalism is something we also find, bring it back to St. Aldo, her notion of personalism is something that we also find in Aldo's work, where he said, there is a clear tendency in American conservation to relegate to government all necessary jobs that private landowners fail to perform. Now, bear in mind, he was also a government worker like myself. But then he says, nevertheless, the question arises, what is the ultimate magnitude of this enterprise, of this government control of nature? Will the tax base carry its eventual ramifications? At what point will governmental conservation, like the mastodon, become handicapped by its own dimensions? The answer, if there is any, seems to be in a land ethic, or some other force which assigns moral obligation to the private landowner. Now, I realize how many people in here own lots of acres? Okay, I'm coming to your house. Let me know if you need some consultation. Most of us are not in a position to think about how we're gonna manage large tracts of land. We might not be woodlot owners, we might not be private landowners, but in the metaphorical sense, all of us are. Land belongs to all of us because it belongs to God. So we need to think about what are those choices I'm making as the metaphorical private landowner. So ladies and gentlemen, you have made it through the presentation, and now it's time to chit chat. What I want to do, and I wanted to share this bit about the government because part of what makes me nervous, and I'm going to choose my words very carefully because I am a government worker, and I'm sure you have seen what happens to people when they say things about the government, and I like my job. I like the people I work with. I'm not convinced let me pause and say what I'm seeing is a decentralization of management in natural resources. So, not necessarily a bad thing, but what that does mean is that we need to up our game. We need to find alignment with the people that are making decisions. And it may not be in the legislative branch. It may not be bills, laws. Let's look to the executive branch, the federal agencies that are promulgating or enacting policies that are setting the wheels in motion for what happens on the ground. And I want to highlight that the federal government has a process for you to weigh in on that. I don't think it's very well known, but I'm here to tell you that it is, because guess what? I'm on the other side that's processing people's input. I want to talk to you about regulations.gov. Thank you, Trish. Has anybody ever heard of this before? Okay, all right, okay. Joe, you don't count. So regulations.gov is a great place to go to learn what the federal agencies are proposing in terms of policies. It's a beautiful site, unfortunately not well publicized, but what I want to show you is two things. When you go to, it's literally www.regulations.gov, this is the homepage. You click on dockets. That tells you all of what current potential policies are on the docket. And you can click here and select federal agencies. The government is looking for your input. And the interesting thing here, and we talked about being nonpartisan, this gets beyond the squabbling in Congress. This gets us at folks like me. You need to tell me what you want us to do with your resources. So, and what we're going to do today to illustrate this concept of engaging and building our social networks through social love, we have a little exercise for you. all of you, and darling, that's you. I mean, there's only one darling in the room, right? Except my parents, but. We have 2 scenarios, and I have, I think, 11 copies. So I would love for small groups of people, maybe at the tables, maybe just little groups of folks, thank you, baby, to just review the 2 examples. They're 2 situations that have relevance right now. One is the rescission of the 2001 roadless rule. The other, oh my God, the other, Joe, the other, I gave my copy away. Thank you. The rescission of the landscape health rule. We worked on these really late last night. Nobody procrastinates. But what I want you guys to do is read the document, choose one of the examples, and I would love for you, now that you're armed with your 4 principles, your 4 guiding principles, imagine what you would write in a comment. As a Catholic, how would we respond to this? And what I have to tell you, remember I said that 1 million people? The chief of the Forest Service is very active with the Knights of Columbus. He's been touring around the country asking for input from people, and he's calling it his Hearts and Minds Tour. There are people within the government that share our values. How do we remind our fellow brothers and sisters of who we are and of what we believe? So I'm going to give everybody about 5 minutes. We'll see how it goes. If you're miserable, we'll come back. But I want to give you some time to think, what are of the 4 Catholic conservation framework elements that we talked about, which of them apply to these examples? And what other values are involved in this scenario? Maybe the value of economic freedom. Maybe the value of the right to own property. All right, can we do this? All right, I see some enthusiasm. I see some folks maybe not into it. Give us 5 minutes and let's give it a shot. of you picked the repeal of the ecological health principle. Okay. Hey, cool. All right. So we're gonna do a little thing here. I have in front of me Speaker of Hope, the original, the OG Speaker of Hope. I have the Pope's autobiography. I'm going to raffle it off to to any of the people that get up and speak. So, or just share what they talked about. Because I know everybody's a little squirrely, no one wants to talk. This is the incentive. If you get up and speak, I will enter your name in a raffle, and one of you will win this book. All right, I'm not beyond shameless plugs, people. All right, so we have a couple minutes left. I would love to just hear some thoughts. How did it go? Was it a challenge? Did you feel like the 4 principles applied? Did you settle on something, sir?
Hold on. I have a microphone, hold on. And we'll keep it short so the people can get their name in. Yes.
Sorry, can I borrow that just to double check it? Thanks. So our group chose the roadless rule, and we thought that the actual applications, the guiding principles, were able to work through this question very well. We looked at 1B, that nature's value must not be defined by purely economic terms. That was the first one that we talked about, just because the majority of the reasoning for repealing the roadless rule seemed to come from the economic value that it would have opened up. We were also looking at creation as a universal good by saying private property ought to have social purpose, private property cannot be acquired at the expense of others. And for the first one, 3A, that could have been an argument for repealing the roadless rule, given that economic value, immediate economic value, could benefit locals or establish the economy. But then we were having to look at, well, what about the next generation? What about and taking the high level view? We also were able to look at the roadless rule through an environmental science standpoint by looking at the fragmentation that might apply when the new roads are put in, changing ecosystems, changing local environments, and instead of having 45 million acres of solid forest, you now have a mosaic and the impacts that can produce from multiple species.
Okay, sir, thank you. Now, to be fair, he works for the the Army Corps of Engineers, so he's a little bit of a ringer. A little bit of a ringer. But, all right, who else wants to share?
And we'll keep it short so that we
Yes.
can get more people in that raffle.
Let's just tell me maybe one thing that you guys came up with, one application. He's also a little bit of a ringer, but that's okay. No, it's in a good way,
So we were talking about the conservation landscape health rule, and if people aren't familiar with this, this was a change in 2024 that went from the previous public use of public lands, which prioritized energy development, ranching, and recreation. They added prioritization, which was to prioritize protecting ecosystems, restoring degraded landscapes, and to use science-based management. And so when we looked at the 4 guiding principles, the first one that we talked to was creation as a universal good. And rather than trying to dismiss the previous uses of public lands development, ranch, and recreation, trying to reframe them to talk about the universal good being a benefit of future generations to be able to use these lands that have been restored, that have been set aside to be able to have an ecosystem that is protected and have value that might not be recognized now in terms of the economic value. After that, we talk quite a bit this all creation is interdependent. So we looked at this and recognized that the vast majority of public lands are in the western United States, but at the same time, people don't look to these rules in terms of if you live in the West or live in the East. This is something that all Americans benefit from, and so to be able to look to the policy in terms of a virtue, a shared good, a societal good, we wanted to be able to have that principle out there so that anybody who would be interested in coming to the United States and be benefit from our societal goods could see this as an expression of what we as a people deem important.
Thank you. All right. So we want to try to get you guys out of here by 12:30. However, we only have 2 people in the running for the book. Grace and rapidity. Can we do it in like 30 seconds? Want me to time you with the little like timer? Just one thing.
Okay, will be really quick. We did the roadless rule. We looked at most of the lands in Alaska, and we questioned, well, why would you want to harvest in Alaska? And there is the universal good for everyone. Are you going to exploit this tract of land for just the good of a few? And it just has its own intrinsic value for being what it is, untouched. And so we thought, okay, we're against it.
That was amazing. How about one more? One more, grace and rapidity. Anybody? Anyone? Bueller? Oh, Peter. Peter's an amazing flamenco dancer too, by the way.
The roadless rule. This is just an idea with the roadless rule. Given the Californian fires, roads are going to have to be rebuilt. So if you're going to rebuild roads, could you, and still conserve your forests, could you use the roads as fire breaks? So in other words, you design your roads as fire breaks, and therefore you're keeping your forest, and you're also allowing the economic utility value to humans.
Thank you. So I will tell you that roads typically do, as a wildland fire, roads typically do serve as fire breaks. However, with the rising intensity and unpredictability of wildfires and fire behavior, due in large part to invasive species and climatic changes, we see a lot more what we call slop over. So roads don't hold as well. In fact, yeah. Matt's also a firefighter, first year. Let's give him a round. All right, guys, so thank you. I really appreciate your time here. We don't necessarily have time for questions, but I'll be up here. One thing I do want to leave you with, though, and tie us back to hope, is that I have a little limerick for you. I love limericks. It's kind of the extent of my poetic ability. But here we go. Maples turn red. Oh, actually, before I finish. So I want to, because the punchline's not going to work for you. As a forester, we think typically on 70-year rotations, right? Like we think about 70 years. What does my action in the forest today, if I mark that tree to have it removed for timber, what is that 70-year impact going to be? And we tend to think about succession. What's coming next? And a lot of that has to do with what is in what we call the duff layer, the detritus, the dead leaves, and other things on the ground. Did I get that right, Matt? Awesome, just kidding. It's been a while since forestry school. So, maples turn red, viburnums do too. Please hold. That's not part of the limerick. Maples turn red, viburnums do too. I am leaving with gratitude for each one of you. This work is important. I'm sure you agree. And if you forget, look up at a tree. This work isn't easy. Some days will be rough. But take comfort in knowing there are seeds in the duff. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Rachel. God bless you all. Just 2 quick announcements. One is there is a creation justice table over there. We have many of our team members, Deb and Andy and Teresa are here. There's more events happening this month. Take a look at that. And secondly, the next Pilgrims of Hope series is Sunday, October 12th. It will be Father Joe Gillespie. It is called Hope is the Thing with Feathers that Perches in the Soul. And that is a quote from Emily Dickinson. You know Father Joe, you can just imagine where he's going. So God bless you all. Let's keep working on the creation justice